I'm making bagels today because our freezer is out. I like to keep some stocked in our freezer. If you're new here, hey, I'm Baker Betty. I'm a baking educator, and you can find this full recipe by Googling Baker Betty Bagels. I'm gonna make a batch and a half of this recipe so that I have 12 bagels. A full batch makes 8 bagels, and I will give you the amounts for a single batch. We're gonna start by making our sponge, which is just a mixture of all of the water, some of the flour, and some of the yeast. And this is going to sit and ferment for a while before I mix my final dough. I'm gonna start with the water. You need 400 grams, which is 1 3/4 cup. And this is just room temperature water. You don't really need it to be warm, but you also don't want it to be cold. Next, you need 1 teaspoon or 3 grams of preferably instant yeast, but if you have only active dry yeast, that will work fine. Lastly, for the sponge, you need 330 grams, which is 2 3/4 cup of bread flour. And yes, you definitely want bread flour. It's going to give you the proper chewy texture for your bagel. I'm just gonna stir this up with a spatula until it's kind of like a really thick batter, and this is going to sit for at least an hour and up to 12 hours out at room temperature. This is called a pre-ferment. It is a mixture of part of the dough that sits for a while before the rest of the dough is added. It's similar idea to a sourdough starter. A sourdough starter is a type of pre-ferment. It is not going to add really sour notes to our bagels, but it's going to add much more flavor than if I were to just mix the dough all together at once. I'm just going to stir this until it is this really thick batter and everything is fully combined. Then I'll cover it and let this sit, and I'll come back later and mix my dough. Okay, it is many hours later, so I'm going to finish mixing the dough. I'm obviously going to need a much bigger bowl for this. I'm going to transfer this over, and then I need to add more flour and some salt, a little bit more yeast, and then the ingredient that makes bagels really taste like bagels is barley malt syrup. I actually don't have any at home. I have a bunch at work, but I don't have any here. So I'm going to substitute it for molasses. We need another 330 grams of bread flour, which is 2 3/4 cup. About a 1/4 teaspoon more of yeast, which is about 1 gram. 15 grams or 1 tablespoon of salt. And then lastly, you want either 8 grams or 1 teaspoon of barley malt syrup, or you can use molasses in place of it, which is what I'm going to use, or you can use malted barley powder, same amount, or you can use brown sugar. Those are kind of your 3 options. Most traditional is either barley malt syrup or malted barley powder. I like to start by doing as much mixing with the spatula as I can, but eventually I am going to have to get my hand in here because that sponge is super stretchy and glutinous. It's hard to get the flour worked in with a spatula. You could do this with the dough hook attachment of your stand mixer, but I find the full kneading part doesn't work great in any home mixers, even a KitchenAid, because this is a super stiff dough. It kind of works the motor a little too hard. So I do the kneading by hand. Once it's kind of starting to come together, I come in with a wide open hand, and I'm just gonna start squeezing and massaging, trying to get all of that flour hydrated. Bagel dough is what we would refer to in bread making world as a low hydration dough, meaning there's a lot of flour in here compared to the amount of water. It's going to be a pretty stiff dough, which means I'm gonna need a little bit of muscle to get this work together. Once I have a thick dough starting to form, I'm gonna move it all out to the counter. I'm gonna scrape all of this flour out because I wanna work it all into my dough, and I'm going to start kneading it. Bagel dough needs a really good long kneading process. I say at least 10 minutes, but honestly 15 minutes is even better. That's what's really going to develop the strength of the gluten structure and really give us the proper texture of bagels. You're not gonna over knead this, especially not by hand. So I'm just gonna keep working this. If the dough starts feeling a little bit sticky, I will add some more flour, but you should be pretty close. Okay, well, set a timer for 10 minutes. If you're ever struggling to get your yeast dough smoothed out as you are kneading it, this is what I do. I kind of think of one side of the dough as staying in contact with the counter, and then I fold the dough over itself bringing the edge into the center and pushing it and then rotating it, kind of keeping that same side of the dough in contact with the counter the whole time, just bringing the edges in on the dough into the center. And that really, really helps smooth your dough out. Every time you're kneading, you're thinking about putting your pressure going across the dough, not down into the counter. And I'm using pressure, but I'm not like grabbing it or squeezing it. That's gonna tear the dough. You don't wanna tear it up as you're kneading it. It should be nice and smooth and elastic. So I'm just kind of pushing it into itself, but pushing across the counter. I am done kneading my dough, so I'm going to go ahead and divide and pre-shape. So you can eyeball this or you can do it by weight. If you do it by weight, it's going to be somewhere around 120 to 130 grams per bagel. I just weigh the whole batch of dough and then divide it by however many bagels I'm making. Now I'm going to pre-shape all of them. I'm just going to take a portion of dough. I'm going to bring all of the edges into a center point. I'm just kind of gently stretching them out and bringing them in, going all the way around the piece until it's kind of in this little bow bun shape. Then I'm going to go seam side down. I'm going to cup my hand over the top, giving some light pressure and just rotating it under my hand. The ball is actually rotating, but the bottom is kind of sticking to the bottom of the counter, and that's going to make it a nice, smooth, tight ball. These just need to rest for about 20 minutes, and I'm going to keep them covered so that they don't dry out, and then I will come back and do the final shaping. We can shape them now. I use two different shaping methods. One is the easy method, one is more of a traditional method. So if I'm going to do the easy method, I just pick up one of the dough balls. I position one finger in the center on the bottom, one finger in the center on the top, and I'm just opening a hole right in the middle. And then I like to just rotate it between some fingers to open up that hole. You do want the hole to be a little bit bigger than what you want the final hole to be, because it is going to close up a little bit as it boils and bakes, but that's the easy method. There are a few different ways to approach the more traditional method. The way I do it is I flip it upside down so that seam side is up. I give it a gentle stretch to elongate it. I fold it in half so it looks kind of like a little empanada or something like that. And then I put that seam side down, put both of my hands together and rotate it underneath my hands, kind of like if you were rolling out a piece of Play-Doh into a Play-Doh snake. And I'm just bringing my hands apart from each other. I'm giving some pretty firm pressure as I'm doing this, and I'm letting the ends of the dough kind of taper off. I want this to be maybe about 10 inches long. Then I'm going to drape that over the back of my hand, crisscross the two ends in the center of my palm. I'm crisscrossing them pretty far. They're kind of covering my whole palm. And then I'm going to seal those together just by rotating it under my hand, really making sure they're sealed. And that's it. That's the more traditional method. Honestly, if I'm just doing these for me and my husband, I use the easy method almost always, but I teach both methods in my bagel making class. These need to rest for about 10 or 15 minutes, which is the perfect amount of time to set up my boiling station. I just like to use a big wide skillet, and then you're going to add enough barley malt syrup or molasses until this looks like a nice kind of dark iced tea color. I just eyeball it. Once the water is gently simmering, I start dropping them in the water, and then I'm going to let them go for about 45 seconds per side. When I go to flip them, I use tongs. I gently use the tongs to guide them over. Always flip away from yourself so you don't burn yourself. If you flip towards yourself, you're going to splash yourself with water. You want to add your toppings pretty immediately when they come out of the boiling water so that they stick. And then we're going to bake these at 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 230 degrees Celsius, for about 20 minutes.